According to General Hospital spoilers for the upcoming 2 weeks, July 7th to 18th, Emma Scorpio Drake will experience some heartbreak while Willow Tate must make a significant decision. Here is what GH fans can anticipate when Drew Kane also gains the upper hand over a formidable opponent. During the week of July 7th to 11th, Anna Devane will provide Emma with some consolation after subjecting Jen Sidwell to a tirade that doesn't work. If the owner contacts Emma, she could have to give up Outback the dog since she will be devastated. Will Vaughn be the one to make contact and pick up the puppy? Will Vaughn take advantage of this circumstance to divert Emma from Professor Henry Hank Dalton's studies and join the animal rights organization she is active in? She'll uncover something unsettling with Sasha Gilmore Corbin, most likely something related to Daisy Gilmore and all of the stalker occurrences. When Lulu Spencer is questioned by Rocco Falconeri about Britt Westbourne and his birth, she will accuse Brooke Lynn Quartermain of disclosing the information to her son. Could Rocco flee to get his thoughts straightened out, as Giovanni Gio Palmieri did after discovering he had been deceived all his life, since he will make a bold step later? Max Scorpio will devise a matchmaking scheme to encourage a romance between Cody Bell and Molly Lansing Davis, while Cody makes another attempt to woo Ava Jerome closer. Will Curtis Ashford get the meeting he asked for when Felicia Scorpio has some news about Jacinda? We'll see if Kai Taylor's latest warning helps him stop Curtis' plans for Jacinda, as Drew will gain influence on an enemy. In any event, when Trina Robinson learns that Kai told Drew about Curtis-Jacinda plot, she will become furious. It will be clear that Kai isn't as devoted to Trina and her family as she believed. Regarding Michael Corinthos, he will reassure someone. That might have to do with calming Sasha down following whatever frightening Daisy shocker she encounters. Willow appears to be prepared to meet with her ex despite Drew's warning about making concessions to Michael. In exchange for visits with the children, Michael will explain the conditions of a deal and probably try to talk Willow out of Drew's marriage. Will Willow continue to let Drew influence her choices, or will she come to a compromise with Michael? Fans will witness the fallout from Rocco's bold decision over the week of July 14th to 18th. Gio might look for and assist in getting his half-brother back to his rightful place if Rocco disappears on Lulu and Dante Falconeri. That might win Dante's sincere appreciation and ease tensions in his relationship with Gio. The conflict between Sidwell and Sonny Corinthos might then provide some unexpected turns. Marcy Rios can turn evil because he thinks Sonny is responsible for Natalia Ramirez's death. That might have an impact on Marco's relationship with Lucas Jones and pave the way for further mob mayhem. Since Kelly Thibault will be back on screen by the end of July, we should finally discuss her comeback. Viewers are excited to watch how everything turns out, regardless of whether Thibault is portraying Britt or someone else. Given the cloning storyline hints, there's a fair probability Thibault's return will relate to Professor Dalton's research. Could Jocelyn Jacks and Jason Morgan's investigations into Dalton's actions overlap in order to find some Britt answers in the lab? According to General Hospital spoilers, there will be a lot of action over the next 2 weeks, so we'll keep you informed of all the developments. Willow sensed the walls enclosing her. The rising storm in her breast was not calmed by the warm sun outside her kitchen window. She stirred her tea absently, attempting to ignore the decision she had to make in favor of the sound of the spoon tapping against the ceramic. Previously, decisions had always seemed more clear-cut. Her marriage, her kids, and her sense of self, however, all felt like a twisted knot that she was unable to untangle. She had dedicated years of her life to the purity of love, loyalty, and doing the right thing at any costs. At one point, she thought they would age together because Michael had been her pillar of support. However, his world had changed so drastically in recent years that she questioned whether she even recognized the guy he was growing into. It went beyond the custody dispute and the secrets he had concealed. It was the knowledge that they had ceased using the same language in an effort to keep their family safe. Instead, Drew, God bless her, had started saying it. Considering the mess Drew was a part of, Willow felt guilty for even considering him in that way. She felt less like a burden and more like a human again, though because of the way he looked at her, vulnerably and honestly. Michael's world, which was full of courtroom tactics and power plays, was rapidly coming to an end. Despite its flaws, Drew's world allowed her to breathe. Willow noticed fragments of her own younger self mirrored in Emma's eyes, while Emma was dealing with her own impending heartbreak. The homecoming was not what Emma had planned for, But she had returned to Port Charles full of hopes and anxious to reconnect. Instead of a reckoning, she had anticipated a reunion upon her return. Despite her best efforts to conceal it, the pain of rejection, or worse, indifference, was increasingly visible on her face every day as her crush on Gio had grown into full-fledged feelings. Like her mother, she had always been sensitive. However, Emma was still tender around the edges in contrast to Robin, who had developed a thick skin from years of adversity and success. And people were cruelly hardened by love. Unrequited, perplexing, ever-changing love. At the gallery opening, she had witnessed Gio and Brooklyn conversing and laughing in an untrustworthy manner. She didn't hold Brooklyn responsible. Emma actually thought highly of her. However, praise did not lessen the impact. The issue was that Emma was unsure of her true desires. She believed it to be Gio. His mystery, his passion, the way he always appeared about to reveal something deep. However, it might not have been him. Maybe it was his concept. She had made up a story to help her feel like she belonged again. Perhaps she missed the version of herself that had previously felt a connection to this town more than Gio himself since she had been gone for so long. In the midst of it all, Drew was engaged in a game that none of them had yet mastered. He spoke steadily and smiled warmly, but beyond that composed demeanor was a man who was desperate to take back control. He couldn't continue to lose against Sonny, Michael, or anyone who undervalued him since he had been the underdog for too long. Few individuals were aware that Drew had a secret weapon that could completely alter the balance of power in Port Charles. It was more than just the merger, the stock price, or even the decline in Nina's power. Leverage was the issue, and it was Drew's. Working through old relationships and exploring areas of Port Charles that people believed he had abandoned, he had been discreet and quiet. What he discovered was entirely related to people and had nothing to do with business. Documents that shouldn't have existed have Michael's name on them. Many bank balances could be jeopardized by a shell firm, moved accounts, and rumors of offshore payments connected to ELQ. Reputations could be destroyed. Drew had no intention of using it. Initially, it had only served as insurance, a safeguard in case Michael made a risky move. However, Drew's confidence in keeping it in his pocket waned as he observed Willow's gradual retreat and the tiny flaws in Michael's character. Willow then informed him that she was thinking about going. Not just the house, not just Michael, but Port Charles as a whole. That was the pivotal moment. Drew could see it in her eyes, even though she hadn't stated it out loud. She was worn out. From acting. From attempting to keep a family together when it was gradually disintegrating. From offering justifications for a man who, despite his many virtues, no longer appeared to notice her. She required a fresh start. And Drew understood that if he played his cards well, he could be involved in it. He did not wish to control her. He wasn't a man like that. But being passive had never worked for him, and life had made him harder. Therefore, he wasn't merely acting out of worry when he gave clues regarding Michael's actions. He was establishing the foundation. Not for a romance just yet, but for a time in the future when she would view him as someone who had been truthful with her when it mattered, rather than as Michael's former ally. Emma, meanwhile, was crying at the park beneath a tree that she used to scale when she was 10 years old. Without a word, Spencer walked by, saw her and sat down. It was not romantic, not even close. However, it made Emma realize that those who loved her didn't always show their affection with lavish displays or poetic expressions. At times they simply appeared. "Are you all right?" At last Spencer inquired. She shook her head and wiped her eyes. Not even close. He didn't inquire about specifics. He simply nodded and remained. Emma couldn't express how much that moment meant. She didn't feel invisible for the first time in weeks. Michael was also starting to notice the change back at the Quartermain estate. He was aware that Willow had been aloof, but he had put it down to the strain of their hectic schedules. Her silences now felt like judgments, though. When he entered a room, her eyes ceased to soften. It had been days since she had uttered, "I love you." Even worse, she didn't appear upset. She seems determined. Losing was something Michael disliked. And until now, Willow had never made it feel like a contest. In an attempt to find out who had been in her ear, he began probing about and asking questions. He was hardly able to control his anger when he discovered it was Drew. He unexpectedly barged into Drew's office. "You don't think I understand what you're doing?" Michael yelled. Drew remained glued to his laptop. You'll need to be more detailed. Willow. She is being used by you. She is being poisoned against me by you. At last, Drew looked him in the eyes. You're working alone on that. Michael stepped forward. She is my spouse. Drew retorted. And she's not your possession. Michael, it is up to her to decide who she wants to be. And perhaps you are no longer that person. The room became silent. Like smoke, Drew's comments lingered in the atmosphere. Michael didn't answer, not immediately. Because he knew in his heart that Drew was telling the truth. That night, Michael didn't sleep. Willow didn't either. Sitting on the back porch, she continued to worry about her kids. She wanted a certain kind of world for them. One in which they discovered that love required selflessness and that quiet was power. Wiley had always learned from her to express his opinions and to believe in his gut feelings. She wasn't, however, doing it herself. She was aware of her obligations. She packed a little luggage the following morning. Only clothing and necessities. She wasn't going anywhere, not just yet. However, she required room. Room to reflect. To take a breath. To discover her identity while no one was putting pressure on her. Michael saw the bag as he descended the stairs. Where are you heading? His voice was small as he requested. Weary yet firm, she gazed at him. To rediscover myself. The foundation suddenly began to fracture. Knowing that he had waited instead of pushing, Drew stood in the background, watching everything happen. It wasn't about winning that gave him the advantage. The goal was to live. And perhaps just possibly creating something tangible. In Kelly's diner, Emma was writing in her journal about a letter she would never send to Gio. She had no intention of pursuing someone who had not chosen her. Her mother's strength was too great for her. However, writing was helpful. She still had hopes both for love and for a purpose. Willow climbed into her vehicle and drove. No place to go. Simply move. And she grinned in the low buzz of the road beneath her wheels. Not because everything was repaired, but since she wasn't waiting for approval to live her own life for the first time in a long time. According to General Hospital spoilers, 3 marriages might be about to end. As Port Charles undergoes a romantic makeover, these couples may end up breaking up. So let's discuss what lies ahead. Harrison Chase and Brooklyn Quartermain have so far had a solid, devoted marriage, but in the upcoming months that might change. Lulu Spencer is going to be upset since Brooklyn is the reason Rocco Falconeri learned that Britt Westbourne gave birth to him. Rocco had already seen the file, so even though Brooklyn chose not to exact retribution for all the Giovanni Gio Palmieri drama that Lulu had unleashed, it was too late. Lulu may decide to blow apart Brooklyn's world, even more now that she is ready to continue the vindictive games. What better way to accomplish it than by ruining the marriage between Brooklyn and Chase? Given that Brooklyn will damage Dante Falconeri's friendship with Rocco, Chase won't be pleased with her behavior anyhow. Chase and Brooklyn may be in peril because of the stress around this Brit research and whatever Lulu does to ruin their relationship. Another married couple that might end up divorcing is Curtis Ashford and Portia Robinson. Portia is plotting and taking action to ensure Curtis is off bounds since she believes Jordan Ashford is after her guy. But Portia might end up failing because of her actions. Portia may push Curtis back into Jordan's arms and ruin her marriage as a result of all the falsehoods she has spoken and the game she is playing. Although they are not yet married, Drew Kane and Willow Tate hope to get married soon. Drew is counting on becoming husband and wife now that Willow has accepted his proposal and agreed to start planning their wedding. Naturally, if Michael Corinthos persuades Willow to apply the brakes, the wedding may be in danger. If Willow decides to postpone the wedding, Michael might agree to allow her to visit, at least temporarily. Should the marriage proceed, it might pave the way for Drew's demise. Willow's wedding day could end up being a complete nightmare, since she will eventually have to learn all of Drew's terrible secrets. However, in the aftermath of their marriage, Willow might marry Drew and discover all the terrible things he has been concealing. If Willow marries Drew and then discovers his actual nature, it will be much more devastating. Stay tuned for updates on the inescapable conflict, as many GH fans are particularly interested in seeing Willow's response to the revelation that Drew and Nina Reeves were hookup partners. Don't miss the 2 blow-ups that are about to happen. According to General Hospital spoilers, secrets, plots, and intricate love tales have long permeated Port Charles's environment, But few could have foreseen the sheer number of marriages on the verge of dissolution. As though fate had positioned all the fissures in these relationships and determined it was time to break them all in one sweeping stroke, there was something almost lyrical about the way everything seemed to come apart all at once. These weren't merely small-scale arguments or miscommunications between partners. No, this was a complete romantic makeover that would rock friendships, families, and futures. 3 well-known marriages that were formerly regarded as unbreakable, or at the very least worthy of a battle, were now disintegrating due to ambition, betrayal, and unresolved issues. Nina had put up a fierce fight to maintain her position in Sunny's life. She had clung to the conviction that her love for Sunny was worth the fight, even in the face of the raging anger surrounding her for her part in the Michael-Carly split. Sunny, however, had evolved. He was philosophically and emotionally toughened by his time in prison. He no longer considered Nina to be his haven because of her fabrications regarding Carly's SSC case and her part in dividing Sunny from his kids, which left a wound that would never completely mend. Of course he tried. Both of them did. There were calm mornings with coffee and short talk, almost real moments, and weekends in Puerto Rico designed to reignite the spark. However, they were never able to return to the selves that had made love in Nixon Falls. Sunny was unable to trust her, and once trust was lost, it was like glass. Even after it was picked up off the ground, it remained hazardous and sharp. It had been the quietest of their arguments, but it was the last one. He had paused when Nina inquired if he still loved her. A screaming allegation could never express what that pause, that beat of quiet did. In her heart, the marriage was over even though she left the penthouse that evening wearing her wedding ring. Sunny refrained from pursuing her. Standing at the window, gazing out over the city, he was troubled by the memories of all the people he had lost and the addition of another name to that list. In the meantime, a new kind of pressure was causing Chase and Brooklyn's once glorious union to falter in another area of town. The once ideal match between the rehabilitated police officer and the fiery, gifted music executive was now entangled in ambition, ego, and unfulfilled expectations. Brooklyn was attempting to balance her relationship with Chase, her thriving career with deception, and her devotion to her family's legacy, but something had to give. And Chase always seemed to be the least important person. He desired stability, a baby, and a home. She desired industry parties, album releases, and tours. The problem was that they just desired different lives, and neither was incorrect. The rift between them was commonplace in the most depressing sense. It wasn't dramatic or sensational. Dinners missed, rearranged holidays, continual fatigue. Even the most ardent marriage would lose its spark as a result of it. Furthermore, despite her flair and drama, Brooklyn was not exempt from the decline in intimacy. She had observed that Chase began to spend more time at the precinct. How Blaze's jokes made him laugh a little too much. How he ceased inquiring about her day. She discovered a partially packed bag in the closet one morning. It was neither concealed nor displayed, as if it were a question just sitting there. He made no denials when she approached him. "I don't think either of us are happy anymore," he said simply, and he was correct. They didn't yell. They didn't hurl objects. A long embrace that lasted just a second too long for two individuals who were meant to be parting ways was shared, along with silent and loud sobs. After Chase left, Brooklyn sat on the bed's edge and gazed at the blank spot on the nightstand where his badge had usually been. She didn't have the energy to fight anymore, but she also couldn't believe it was done. Then came Curtis and Portia, the most intricate case of all. Despite having been founded on optimism, their marriage was tainted from the start by animosity. Even after the truth was revealed, despite the apologies and second chances, Portia's lie about Trina's paternity lingered between them like a ghost. Curtis had attempted to put it behind him, but his disability, his damage, and his sense of identity loss caused him to doubt everything. Now what sort of husband might he be? What sort of dad? And would he be able to trust Portia in the future? For her part, Portia had been making every effort to demonstrate her loyalty. She had pushed herself into trying to be sufficient, providing care, and making their house accessible. However, love is not demonstrated by checklists. Curtis desired a spouse rather than a nurse. And he was reminded of what she had done each time he saw the remorse in her eyes. What she hadn't told. Of course there were times when they connected. Quiet musings, modest laughs, and shared meals. However, those were becoming less and less common. The tipping moment was unanticipated. Only Trina, Taggart, and a few close friends were present, and it was a family get-together. Curtis overheard Portia telling Taggart that, although it wasn't intended to be hurtful, she still occasionally wished she could go back and do it all differently. Later that evening, she was confronted by Curtis. "I don't want to be someone's regret," he told her. Portia made an effort to clarify, but the reality was that they had come to a place where talking to each other simply served to exacerbate their problems. Everyone knew that their decision to separate for a while was a pretext for something more long-term. The way that all three of these failing marriages ended was arguably more unexpected than the fact that they ended at all. Silently. Close to home. Without the pomp and circumstance for which Port Charles locals were renowned. No public altercations, no tabloid-splattered private affairs, and no custody disputes, at least not just yet. Only those who have loved one another in the past have realized that love isn't always sufficient. That sometimes things just don't work, regardless of how much history you have in common, or how much you want them to. The consequences spread swiftly. Now lost, Nina started to doubt everything about who she was. Despite her best efforts, Crimson was unable to fill the vacuum. Ironically, she started to run into Carly more frequently than she would have liked to, especially once Willow started hesitantly patching things up with her biological mother. There was a noticeable awkwardness between them, but somehow it led to a peculiar understanding. Sunny had been adored by both women. They had both lost him. Both were now figuring out how to live without him. Never one to mope, Brooke Lynn pushed herself even more fully into deception. However, the heartache persisted. Sensing the breach, Blaze unexpectedly became a closer confidant. Although Brooke Lynn wasn't yet prepared to investigate it, the boundaries between friendship and something more were hazy. Chase began spending more time with Blaze as well. However, it was unclear if this was a romantic relationship or just a diversion. Constantly calm, Portia started to show signs of weakness. At the hospital, she made a few little but noticeable blunders. Inquiring whether she was all right, her co-workers muttered. Trina also took note. Additionally, Trina allied more with Curtis than her mother for the first time. No argument could possibly make that hurt more. Portia started to worry that she was losing each member of her family one by one. Surprisingly, Curtis started to feel stronger because of his independence. He was still a guy and a parent despite his wheelchair. He found meaning when he resumed tutoring teenagers. Although it provided him with a foundation, it did not take away the agony. Away from the wreckage of his marriage. Rumors of fresh relationships started to circulate as Port Charles's summer grew warmer. Sunny and Natalia were spotted together more frequently. Some assumed they were buddies, while others conjectured that they were more. Michael, who had previously been adamantly opposed to Nina, appeared to be warming up, more for Willow's benefit than anything else, but the change was noticeable. As Sam got closer to Jason, whose return had caused more emotional turmoil than anybody had imagined, Sam and Dante were also dealing with their own problems. After all of this love breakdown, an odd feeling of liberation surfaced. These couples' dissolution signified the tumultuous start of something new, not the death of hope. The city of Port Charles was changing. Both new and old alliances were being forged and tested. What it meant to stand alone, or perhaps stand next to someone unexpected, was being explored by the characters who had previously adhered so tenaciously to their positions as spouses. Pain was there, of course. Lots of stuff. However, there was also clarity. For a change, these characters weren't attempting to mold love into something it wasn't. They were admitting what no one in Port Charles ever wanted to acknowledge, that knowing when to let go can sometimes be the greatest gesture of love. Each of these three marriages, Curtis and Portia, Brooke Lynn and Chase, and Nina and Sunny, had been the result of ardor, perseverance, and the conviction that love was stronger than all other forces. However, love had not been sufficient on its own. And now something else had to come up out of the wreckage. Nobody knew if there would be more heartache, new love, or healing. However, silence seldom lasted long at Port Charles. Marriage dissolution was merely a new chapter, occasionally bitter, occasionally lovely, but never the last. Not in a town where secrets are everywhere, and where the heart never stops beating, no matter how many times it breaks. Rocco was dealing with his own storm somewhere. Since learning of his mother's illness, the adolescent had been on a downward spiral, and now he felt as though his entire world was collapsing. In a long-term care facility, Lulu may have been physically alive, but she remained unresponsive. Every visit left Rocco feeling hollow, and that sort of purgatory was worse than death. On one occasion, the doctors had provided hope. Over the years, clinical upgrades and depressing looks had supplanted that hope. Rocco's long-suppressed rage had finally erupted in the face of the recent violence and tension that had been building in Port Charles. He stopped misbehaving at school and stopped attending altogether. Rocco didn't yell or object when Dante confronted him after he had been gone for hours the previous evening. "Why should I care?" he asked, staring blankly. "You obviously don't." Dante would never acknowledge the depth of that wound. He lacked the necessary equipment to treat his son's pain. He could solve everyone else's problems, but not his own family's, which was the irony of being a father and a detective at the same time. Dante was aware that Rocco was a ticking time bomb. However, he didn't have time to be everywhere at once because of Sonny's warehouse attack, the sweltering streets, and the inappropriate people's incessant queries. And more than anything else, that guilt tore at him. Sidwell, on the other hand, had had enough. For far too long, the financial consultant-turned-fixer had been avoiding the spotlight of Port Charles' power. Too many criminals and business tycoons had benefited from his cleanups. Recently, however, the lines had become too hazy to be fixed. Sidwell was immediately impacted by the explosion at Sonny's warehouse, which wasn't merely a gangland power maneuver. Federal investigators were now looking into one of his shell companies that had been connected to the property through a convoluted web of holding corporations. For the first time in years, the guy who was known for his cool reasoning and icy manner lost control. He slapped his briefcase down on the table inside the Corinthos coffee front desk so forcefully that the room was silent. Startled and wary, Dex stiffened close to the door. No one, including him, was accustomed to seeing Sidwell in this state. "You believe that I can be left in the dark about this conflict?" With his voice low and brimming with rage, Sidwell snarled. "I told you not to let your personal grudges interfere with my interests." Already tense, Sonny took a while to answer. He simply gazed at him, examined him. "You knew what you were getting into when you came into this world," he added. "You want to call foul now?" With passion in his eyes, Sidwell drew closer. "I'm cashing out. I'm not complaining. I won't make the next headline if your adversaries deliver explosives and messages. You are by yourself." Sonny clenched his jaw at that. Another foundation crack. Another ally retreating. And each day the list grew shorter. However, not everyone was able to take a step back. For example, Gio was stepping more into a future he had not requested. The young man had always been caught between being an ordinary child and Corinthos' successor. Gio had always believed that he could pick his own path, growing up in a world of risk but yearning for normalcy, and enjoying privilege but not tranquility. But hard and unavoidable reality was beginning to set in. To feel grounded, he had been making an effort to date discreetly, keep his head down, and even work part-time at Rice Plaza. However, that ideal was dashed when two men who knew exactly who he was jumped him outside the club one night. "You believe we have forgotten about your uncle's treatment of our cousin?" After a fight, one of them slammed Gio into a trash, leaving him bleeding, injured, and embarrassed. He chose not to visit the hospital. He kept his father in the dark. He kept it a secret. However, Brooke Lynn's voice became stern as she noticed the bruises, which spoke for themselves. Who was responsible for this? She insisted. Gio averted his gaze. "I don't want to discuss it." This time, she urged gently, "You have to talk about it. This goes beyond you. Your safety is at stake here."